Salam, welcome. My name is Matt Gordner. I'm a political scientist, policy analyst, and the co-founder of Tanmiya for Social Change, an organization that promotes human-centered development across the Middle East and North Africa. Whether as a camp counselor, student leader, or community organizer, I've been working with young people my whole life. So much so that I centered my whole academic career on youth politics. So today, I'm going to talk to you about some of my research on why youth empowerment is so central to the future of civic participation in Tunisia. Let's begin with, what is youth and why are youth important? Well, youth are the engines of political, economic, social, and cultural growth, creativity, and innovation. Young citizens aged 18 to 25 were the drivers of the 2010-2011 uprisings in Tunisia that precipitated the protest movement across the whole Middle East and North Africa, called the Arab Spring. Yet today, most young people in Tunisia feel disempowered, like they can't access the opportunities that they deserve as hardworking, talented, and educated citizens. This is especially the case for young people who live in rural areas where the uprisings began. To understand why youth are so important, it's helpful to understand youth in terms of demographics, human resources, public policies, and identity. Let me unpack these for you one by one. As a demographic, 44% of Tunisia's population lies between the ages of 25 and 54, with the average age of Tunisian citizens hovering around 32. Contrast this with the average age of Tunisian parliamentarians in 2019, which was around 48 years old. One of the looming problems in Tunisia is this gap between generations and the stigma attached to youth participation in formal politics. Many older people just don't value the experiences, skills, and perspectives that youth bring to the table. A recent Arab Reform Initiative report suggested lifting the age limit on the presidency altogether, which is currently set to 35 years old. There's no reason why a 28-year-old wouldn't make a better president than her 80-year-old running mate, based solely on her age, especially given that she would be better able to represent the interests of the average Tunisian, would likely understand much better the advents of technology, the use of social media, and the role that globalization plays in national and local forms of economic and human development. Youth are also a human resource issue. Although Tunisia has some of the highest literacy rates in Africa, at around 81%, Tunisia is 19th in the world in unemployment, with around 1/3 of males and 1/2 of females unemployed. There's also a supply and demand problem, which constitutes a public policy issue. Unemployment rates among higher education graduates is around 29% nationally, leaving many Tunisians with quality educations without employment that matches their expectations. There are also significant generational, regional, and gender gaps that deserve our attention. Youth unemployment in Tunisia is currently estimated to be around 38%. And this number is as high as 50% for some cities in the interior regions, where folks experience multiple forms of marginalization. And as many as 60% of young women are not currently employed, in training, or in education, a rate much higher than their male counterparts. What this means is that young people's talents are being underutilized, leaving many people feeling anxious over the direction of their lives and upset about their unused potential as agents for political, economic, and social change. To answer some of these questions, I'm going to turn to my friend, Professor of Economics, Fadhel Kaboub.
My name is Fadhel Kaboub. I'm a Tunisian-American economist. I teach economics at Denison University in Ohio, and I'm the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity.
So in the prior segment, we were talking a lot about unemployment and underemployment in Tunisia and how taking on an intersectional approach, some of those issues hit particular demographics. And a lot of your work over the last 2 decades has been to think about solutions to unemployment in Tunisia. Can you maybe identify some of the problems that the Tunisian economy is facing and provide us with some solutions?
The main problem that Tunisia faces is very clear to everyone in Tunisia, which is the external debt crisis that we have. So debt denominated in dollars and euros. And my work looks at where that debt comes from. Its root causes is the trade deficit, and it comes from 3 major deficiencies. The first one is massive energy imports. The second one is massive food imports. And the third one is an industrialization deficiency, whereby the Tunisian economy, like many countries in the global south, imports high value added content, capital equipment in particular, and exports low value added manufactured products. So we import the capital, the energy, the intermediate components, the know-how, the technology, and then we use low-cost labor to export low value-added content. Those three deficiencies produce a structural trade deficit that's permanent, and that trade deficit makes the value of the dinar weaker relative to the dollar, and that forces us to borrow dollars and euros to keep importing the basic necessities, food, fuel, medicine, and so on. Otherwise, if we don't do that as a band-aid solution, we end up with much weaker Tunisian dinar, and we end up with much more expensive imports. And a lot of this is actually happening as we speak. That's related to the depreciation of the dinar. So these are the structural problems, and any solutions that we put in place, they have to be solutions that don't exacerbate these weaknesses, but rather alleviate these weaknesses. So we might be motivated by job creation for youth, but if we feed those deficiencies via an employment program funded by the government, for example, we will not be serving the Tunisian economy, even though we might be doing the right thing in terms of creating jobs. The good news is that there are ways to remedy these three deficiencies and at the same time create employment for youth, create employment for everyone who's ready, willing, and able to work in Tunisia. The only condition is that we must have a long-term strategy to address the lack of food sovereignty problem, to address the lack of energy sovereignty problem, and to transform our industrial base from a low value added manufacturing base to a much higher value added manufacturing. So the job creation has to be targeted towards those three areas in order to transform them, rather than in order to feed them additional employees to continue the same extractive nature that we've been pursuing since independence, to be honest. And that's why I always describe it as the continuation of the colonial and neo-colonial economic system.
What are some of the solutions that Tunisian partners can come up with in order to remove that system of dependency?
Number one is recognizing that we're not in this alone. There's 100 plus other countries in the global south of similar size and have similar deficiencies. So the solution, especially on the industrial front, is to partner with other countries in the global south, especially on the African continent, whereby we have all the natural resources needed to industrialize. We have all the human capabilities. So we have complementarity of resources and capabilities. We may lack technological capabilities in some areas, say to manufacture renewable energy equipment, to manufacture high-speed trains for transportation across the continent and so on. This is where you form your long-term strategic vision, Pan-African vision, let's say, as a continent, as a block of countries, and negotiate using your economic diplomacy with the European Union, with Germany, with Japan, with China, with the US. It doesn't matter which strategic high-tech partner, as long as that negotiation is based on mutual benefit and cooperation rather than a hierarchical, extractive relationship, neo-colonial relationship. So that's really the foundation for starting a transformative industrial policy in Tunisia and around the African continent.
The uprisings of 2010 and 2011 provided young people with a common and collective identity of leading a revolution and struggling for democracy and human rights after overthrowing the authoritarian rule of the Ben Ali regime. This culminated in the sit-ins of the Kasbah Square in downtown Tunis, and this collective experience generated a national conversation about what comes next. The sociologist Karl Mannheim called this phenomenon a generational unit. He said that a generational unit is created when similarly located contemporaries participate in a common destiny and in the ideas and concepts which are in some way bound up in its unfolding. In simpler terms, young people of working age participated in a historical event that forever altered the landscape of political and associational life in Tunisia. In the years that followed, the number of civil society organizations more than doubled, from around 10,000 organizations in 2011 to over 24,000 organizations in 2022. Throughout this period, young people continually took to the streets to demand work, freedom, and national dignity. Struggles for political, social, economic, and transitional justice that were waged through street protests, social movements, and civil society organizations that pressured the government to reconsider its policies. So, where does that leave us today? Well, for one, there's a clear generational divide between those people who participated in the 2010-2011 uprisings and the generation above them, born of the Ben Ali regime. Unfortunately, that divide is characterized by a lot of mistrust among younger Tunisians in their leaders and institutions, whether political parties, government bodies, and major media outlets. As a result, most Tunisian youth are not interested in joining formal politics. And without young politicians, the voices of young people are not being heard, because oftentimes street protests and social movements are being overlooked and ignored. But there's also a new generation, Generation Z, coming into its own. What's exciting is the prospect for this new generation to incorporate the lessons of the past with their own skill sets, technologies, and innovations in the service of advancing Tunisia both economically and politically into the future. The empowerment of young people begins with identifying both leaders and policies that make sense, be they politicians, social innovators, or change makers, and working with, and sometimes outside of, government to make sure that needs and expectations of the most vulnerable Tunisians are met and ultimately fulfilled. Once again, my name is Matt Gordner, and you can find me on L'Instant English Moment, discussing more about international culture and society in English. If you appreciated this video, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for other ideas you'd like our team to develop, drop a comment below. We're listening and we hear you. Bye.